So we're going to talk tonight about a vision for what we call a B-commerce, Bitcoin commerce world. To talk about that, I'm going to be asking Craig some questions over the next hour that go through the past of Bitcoin, its present today, and then our vision for this future world. So let's start at the beginning by going to the past. And it starts with basically the question of really what is money? Because to understand Bitcoin, I think you have to understand what's money. So Craig, what's your description of how our traditional money systems have worked?
Money is solidified trust. At the end of the day, there was never any period with this myth of barter. Barter never really existed. The reality is we found ways of always exchanging and finding money. At one stage, it was tally sticks, or it was grain, or it was clay tablets with inscriptions saying you were owed so much, or whatever else. And it became a unit of exchange that people could actually use between people who didn't know each other, people who didn't trust each other. And that's what it's about. Not third parties, but something that each of you can agree has a value over time.
So, for example, I pulled out of my pocket a 20-pound note. So how does this represent trust?
Well, most people still think there's gold or silver or something like that. The whole idea of the pound sterling was that it was originally a pound sterling. I mean, then it became an ounce and got less and less and diminished over time. But
now it's a piece of paper.
I mean, if we think about it, a pound is fairly heavy. You get a lot of silver with a pound. I mean, you got nearly 10 kilos worth of silver in, 20 pounds. And what we have now is a guarantee that they will give you another 20 pounds. So you have the right to go in there and take your dirty old 20-pound note and get another 20-pound note. So that's where we've moved to. Instead of the guarantee of getting something that other people valued like silver, we now promise to give you a different piece of paper.
And I have to trust that you and other people in this room and merchants will recognize this as a certain value, right? And then the money system also currently works with a central authority, right? Where do pounds get issued from?
In England, we had, a history of slowly degrading the money. In France, they thought they could just degrade it straight away. And the problem is, if you do that, people eventually go back and either go to the bank or wherever else they've got their money held, and they say, I want the asset behind this. And most people don't realize, but Nixon closed the gold standard because in 1971, the actual gold holdings owned by the US government were 5%. So for every dollar issued, they had 5 cents worth of gold. And of course, it becomes rather unsustainable at that stage.
So our traditional money system depends on some central bank or authority to issue the currency, and of course can deflate or inflate it based upon
volume. Which is trust.
Right, which is trust. And it also depends on intermediaries, things like banks and payment processors, to record and move, money and value along, right?
So one of the key aspects of what is money is it's a unit of account. It's probably the most important one. As a unit of account, you have a ledger that effectively says how much you can spend at a distant time, not how much value you have necessarily, but how much of a future at the time you want to spend it, percentage of the world's economic view you can take.
So now let's go to Bitcoin. How would you describe how the concept of Bitcoin changes what the traditional money system is?
The difference with Bitcoin, instead of having a central authority or a government or anyone else, you have competition managing the system. Now, the problem and why everything else has failed in the past isn't everything that you keep hearing. It is because any individual is always going to be corrupted. Any single government, any single authority, any single bank. If you can add a little bit now, a little bit again on top of that, a little bit on top of that, you will. That's what happens. With Bitcoin, you can't cheat. Not because it's impossible to change the rules, but because if you change the rules, you have to get everyone else to change the rules. And to get them to change the rules, you have to let them know that it's so that, well, I'm in trouble. I need you to bail me out. And that starts being a problem because people realize that, why would I want to help you? It makes me less profitable. So the whole nature of competitiveness actually works, instead of working against things, it means that those central sort of people mining that then are dispersed are no longer central. They're actually competing with each other, whether you want to say to screw each other, to undercut each other, to whatever else, to basically get as much money as they can and much profit. And to do that, it means they have to actually make an honest system. Because if they cheat, they lose. So the interesting thing is, you actually force and incentivize people to make money that they can't cheat on.
And so it can't be done because, unlike traditional forms of currency, there's no central bank or authority that issues it. The ledger is kept on what we call the blockchain, kept by mining nodes that operate the ledger system, the blockchain. They sustain the network by mining to solve for blocks, and they keep track of all the transactions. And so with Bitcoin, you have this network of thousands of mining nodes around the world running, ant miners and computer servers to maintain the network. And as you were saying, it's hard. You can't cheat in the Bitcoin world about the value of the currency because it requires the agreement, the consensus of all these different mining nodes, right, to confirm a transaction or confirm the value of it. And so that's part of the security of the system.
Exactly. What it really comes down to is any one miner can be trusted, because the only way to change the system is to gain a consensus of many miners. You have to have greater than 50%. And even then people will notice it. Not you need to run it at home, but you need to trust that the competitive process, that businesses actually want to make a profit. Not whether you like it or not, the fact that businesses will try and make a profit. And they will undercut each other to make more.
So let's talk about the original vision for Bitcoin, birthed in a white paper, the Satoshi Nakamoto white paper. Have you read it?
I don't know.
A few times. I think you've read it a few times.
I've read this thing about cash or something.
So the title of the paper is very important in expressing its vision. It's Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. What's so important about the phrase electronic cash?
All right. The first thing is, it's this magical sort of thing that you can transfer down phone lines. You can know that there's never going to be more than a certain amount of Bitcoin.
21 million?
Just under.
Just under, yeah.
A few. And you also know that you can send it anywhere on Earth quickly, whether that's SMS, whether it's web pages, whether it's direct to a node.
And needs to be cheap.
And it needs to be cheap.
Right. I mean, otherwise people wouldn't use it as cash.
I spent a little bit of time in the past in Germany, and we went back last year with my wife and family, and we went to visit this street that used to have every single shop taking Bitcoin. Back in 2014, every shop in this street in Berlin would accept Bitcoin. When we went there last year, or just over a year ago, one shop still took Bitcoin, and they didn't advertise it. And everyone sits there going, Bitcoin, well, only for big purchases. Well, these were restaurants, and they were cafes, and they were clothes shops. And the reality is, if you're going to pay $20 to $40 for a transaction, you're not going to buy at a restaurant, you're not going to buy at a clothes shop, you're not going to buy at a cafe. And like it or not, all of those disappeared. They stopped accepting it. And if we don't have merchants accepting Bitcoin, we don't have money. And if we don't have it as money, it becomes a speculative gambling asset.
So you talk a lot, and I spent a lot of time talking with you about this, about why the economics of Bitcoin are really important, the economics of the whole system. You want to describe for our audience what the economics of the system are and why it's so important to making it successful?
Basically, what we have is a very integrated game theoretic system. It is not a Nash game. There is no equilibrium. It is a multiplayer game. And that's very important. There's no end to Bitcoin. There is never an equilibrium. And you don't ever want an equilibrium because money never ends. So we have a Stackelberg game. Now, most people look at Stackelberg as a leader type game in marketing or whatever else. But the reality is we have multiple leaders. And people come and go. And because of proof of work, they last and survive and grow and fail and are replaced. And that's good. It means over time we have a system that self-replenishes, that requires constant, sort of not just a little bit, but constant, unrelenting innovation. It survives because people are highly competitive. They will inch out that little bit more.
You mean the miners?
The miners, the merchants, everyone, not just the miners. The miners, but other people. I mean, if we look back at the past, the mining wasn't the only way that people made money in gold mines. It was the people selling shovels. It was the people selling hardware. It was all those other things that we like to forget about, like the brothels, the bars, everything that kept people, well, active when they're not mining.
Yeah. So you also talk a lot about how you believe Bitcoin will provide people around the world financial sovereignty. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is moving away from this idea of having your own full node, but having your own keys. Control of your keys is important. So that's one of the reasons we've been looking at techniques like thresholding that we're going to be releasing this year, that we've been working with other companies to build. Strangely enough, we don't want to own the whole ecosystem. We want other people to build our ideas. And we want to give them away so that people can build our ideas. And we want to make a competitive environment at every level. But if you own your keys, you own your Bitcoin. And I'm not going to bitch at Coinbase, but they don't let you own your keys. So we want something where you own and control what you have.
Whereas, for example, if I have funds in a bank account right now, do I really fully control that?
Well, if you have a bank account, you don't own that money at all. You own a debt obligation. The bank owns your money. That's what people don't realize. As soon as you deposit something in a bank, it's theirs. They can do whatever they want with it. Whatever the contract and the law says is the limits, and even then they go past them.
Right. And you depend on all the intermediaries in our financial system to be able to access or move your money or pay for things, right? Credit cards, payment processors, the PayPals of the world.
And even then, we look at things and we think it's quick. And people don't realize that Visa can be 60 days. You can actually have transactions reversed 60 days later. And that is a cost, 2 to 3% overhead.
So part of the dream of Bitcoin is the ability to give people around the world actual control and ownership of their money in a different form. And so we are going to be talking tonight more about this dream of a BCom world, a Bitcoin commerce world. In your mind, what does that world look like?
It's borderless. The biggest mistake anyone in the world came up with was nationalism, jingoism, countries, boundaries. The worst mistake anyone ever allowed themselves to make was putting a national border in place, that thinking governments could tell us who we can sell to, who we could buy from, where we could move, where we can trade. Once we have Bitcoin, when we have a digital world and we can buy and sell, I don't care whether someone works in Africa, in Sierra Leone, or works in the Seychelles, or works in Curacao, or works in Washington. I care about the quality of my goods and my services and what I'm being delivered. That's it. I want to be able to open a world where everyone can trade. I don't want Americans to trade. I don't want Canadians to trade. I want to see a world where the world trades, where we care about the individuals globally, where a poor guy in Africa can actually get an education and build web pages and make money, where anyone can, And we stop caring anymore that it's Australian made or UK made or Chinese made. We care about the fact that we're helping this world, not jingoistic crap, and there's no other way to say it, but crap, about some politician sitting there going, we need to wave our little flag and help our national economy because my GDP figures don't look good and you're going to vote me out. We want an interconnected global world.
Where you can send money to people. Give it a round of applause. I think that's a great dream. I'd call that a win. And it's a dream where you can send money to people and merchants without regard to what currency it is, right? Or exchanging currency, which eats up money, requires intermediaries, and you can send this money to someone in Sierra Leone from right here.
I was trying
Easily.
to buy goods from some people, a manufacturer the other day in China, and it was a nightmare. The bank would not send more than $200 at a time. They made me go through a whole lot of KYC and whatever else things. They froze my credit card because they said I was dealing with Chinese people, so therefore it's probably fraud. Which case I contacted and went to the bank, and then the next day they did the same thing and closed my account again, saying that I was probably defrauded again. I said, it's the same account I went in there for yesterday. And they went, how do we know that? And I went in there yesterday. Same company, same expense, yada, yada, yada. And I ended up having to go through Western Union. It took 8 days to get the payment through. For a $200 payment, I paid $38 US. And yeah, the Chinese guys were finally happy, and I got some little test thingies that I wanted them to sort of make for me. And no wonder people stop doing this sort of stuff, because it becomes so ridiculous.
So let's clear up a misconception. A lot of people in Bitcoin worlds think that big banks, big businesses are afraid of or shouldn't want Bitcoin. Why is that wrong?
Well, I don't think that's wrong. I think that's what they believe. It doesn't mean it should be. And even the banks shouldn't be feeling that way. Everyone has to change. This is capitalism. It's Schumpeterian. If you don't know what that means, it means disruptive.
But banks, shouldn't be afraid.
They shouldn't. And this is the thing. We have a world of change. We have a world of growth. And we have a world that is opening up everywhere. And banks aren't a depository. They're not something that holds your money in a vault and does nothing. Once, bankers were respected. My wife's father was a banker, and back then, they were respected. This is where we've come from. It used to be that bankers were one of the most respected people in society. We're not anymore, because it's not about how do we invest your money for you? How do we find loans? What do banks actually exist for? They're there to distribute capital. That's what we need to get back to. How do we help people get homes? How do we help people start businesses? And that's going to be a radically changed model. It's not going to be national. It's not going to be your local city. It's going to be global. And people need to start thinking, if they're a bank, how they're going to survive this model. And if they sit there going, I'm going to put my head in the sand, it will bypass me, they'll find that they don't exist.
So now let's move to the present. We've talked about kind of where Bitcoin came from, but let's move to the present and talk about, the big topic of the last couple of years, the block size debate, which has now led to the creation of Bitcoin Cash. So for those of you who have been following, the Bitcoin blockchain began with no cap on the block size, which is every 10 minutes how many transactions can fit into the block of data that gets added. But then a 1 megabyte block size cap was imposed. This has led to a civil war, essentially, debate in the Bitcoin community about how to make the network scale larger so that we could do more transactions and it could rival the Visa and global MasterCard payment systems. And so there's the small blockers who say we need to keep the cap small and then do solutions off the chain or on side chains to do the fast payment processing and settle periodically to the blockchain. And then there are the people on the big block side of the fence who believe that we should have massive on-chain scaling so that you can have enough speed and volume in the blockchain to allow transactions that at a speed that rivals Visa and MasterCard. Visa at its peak at 56,000 transactions. Okay, so we're clearly at nChain on the large, massive block on-chain scaling side of the world. Tell our audience why you believe that is key to the success of Bitcoin.
At the end of the day, what matters is you're being able to spend your money quickly and easily. Not that you can personally go out there and say, I have a complete copy of every transaction on the world that ever happened. If you want to audit them, do it like auditors really do. Download a particular block and go through it and go, yes, this is right. And if you want to save it, you don't need to save it forever. This is the magic of things like hashes. Once you've validated a block, get rid of it. The hash won't change. You can discard it unless you happen to be a miner or a merchant that needs to check UTXO sets. If you're a home user, what the hell do you need to come back and go, well, I checked it last week, but has it changed? Maybe someone snuck a transaction in there and found a collision in a hash using some magic new algorithm that no one's ever heard of, and suddenly I've got to check again. Nope, hasn't changed. I better keep that because next week I'll do the same.
So there are other constituents of the Bitcoin community who advocate for these off-chain and side-chain solutions to allow faster payments. Why do you think those are not the answer?
Bitcoin is a distributed system. That doesn't mean that every person on Earth has to do everything. That's the error. What it means is many, many miners compete. So those miners, because they're not actually one entity and that there are many companies, many countries, many different groups all over the place, all trying to get a small piece of the pie, they validate. And miners don't make rash changes. We've seen that already. We saw that with even any of the blockchain sort of proposals, any of the other proposals over time. Miners are very conservative. If you think you can get miners to change, well, good luck. I mean, it's a very slow, painful, I'll keep saying painful a few more times, painful process.
Yes.
Yes.
So last August, the debate in the community sort of reached a climax by the forking off of Bitcoin Cash, which you believe represents the true vision of Bitcoin. Why?
It is Bitcoin. The difference is Bitcoin Cash, I mean, you can argue EDA and a couple of other minor changes that are there, but there are many changes that are in Bitcoin from the original version. But the fundamental protocol is Bitcoin Cash. There are lots of things that at the moment for the next hard fork that are being worked on to change that no one talks about. The integers within Bitcoin, when you originally had the version in 2009 and 10, no one talks about the fact that you could overflow those integers. They were unsigned. So in the early version of Bitcoin, when you did arithmetic and it overflowed, it was okay. It would still be there. No one cared. But fortunately for us, Core have saved us by making them signed integers and ruining all the mathematical functions that you can do and making smart scripts basically crap because you can't actually do anything. So all of that will be fixed and will go back so that people can do calculations that actually matter, so that we can actually have people invent things, have people do ICOs, have people do all this stuff that people argue is spam, paid transactions, like coffee, like ICOs, like Ethereum. All these things really that are competing alts exist only because they were forced away from Bitcoin.
Because it got too slow and
too high. No changes. Back in the day, Vitalik was actually looking at making Ethereum as a Bitcoin project. Back in 2013, Ethereum would have been Bitcoin, apart from the fact that it was going to be kiboshed from the beginning, so screw that and I'll make my own. We could have had all that value in one place. We could have been bigger. We could have had less volatility. We could have been used and marketed everywhere. We are now fragmenting, which is exactly what banks and Visa and American Express and everyone would love to see. If we fragment, lots of little things are easy to squash. Divide and conquer. If we are all doing our own thing on our own little coin, we are nothing. And we are going to change that. We are going to make Bitcoin Cash all it was meant to be. We are going to build an ecosystem, an infrastructure, and we're going to actually not care about pumping price or anything like that. We're going to get people using it day to day, having merchants exchange, having smart contracts, having everything that Ethereum thought that they could do but hasn't managed to do, and more.
So you think that because of the issues, the legacy Bitcoin chain experience, it created an opening for altcoins to emerge, and now there's, I can't even count how many. There's probably a new coin that just got birthed while we were sitting here. The Phoenix coin, right?
Jimmy coin.
Yeah, the Jimmy coin. It's a win. But as you were just saying, you believe that all of the functionality these other altcoins claim they can provide, or different features, you think they're all doable on Bitcoin Cash, right?
And more.
Explain why.
There are a lot of things that people don't realize you can do at the moment. I've been talking about some of the scripting and tokenization capabilities, the ability to actually do smart scripts that link to oracles, and all of this for a while. This year, all these things come out. And we're going to be totally mean and nasty, and we have patented them, and we're going to give them away to Bitcoin Cash. And I'm mean and nasty because we're giving them away to Bitcoin Cash, full stop. So if you're on other things, too bad. That's the wonders of intellectual property. You don't have to sell it necessarily for money. You can control what you want done with it. And that's not only alts, but we have solutions that will suit banks and suit accounts and do everything from, well, what we're doing with cryptocurrency to new ways of doing distributed hash tables have been patented. And all of that links to what we're doing in Bitcoin. And we're going to start releasing all of that. And quite frankly, it's going to start disrupting all sorts of industries, which is why we've had some of our first investments in companies like yours, because we're going to not only disrupt money, but how you get intellectual property and content and music and you name it. And all of that's going to be part of a blockchain. And all of it's going to be linked to money and linked to use and linked to access. And then you can actually start opening up all these things globally. Not because you have a border. I mean, as an Australian, it always used to annoy the you-know-what out of me, because we would get movies 6 months later sometimes. Well, I thought that was stupid. I mean, yes, they thought they could make more money by having different regions, but that changes when you can sell globally in a true sense. And that's what we're going to start doing. We want a global world.
So if we, as a crypto community, start centralizing on Bitcoin Cash and the functionality that other coins claim can be done on Bitcoin Cash, it's your belief the value of Bitcoin Cash is just going to skyrocket.
Exactly. And Jimmy says centralized, but it's not centralized. We're not going to take over development. We are not going to become a Facebook or a Google in the normal way. We're going to become something new. We could have bought up a whole lot of developers, which is the traditional way of doing these things. If you're Google or Facebook, you buy a whole lot of developers and you do it yourself. We're not going to. We're going to build a new economy in this world. We're going to do it in a new way.
So, what Craig is saying, and it's important, I think, for us as voices of nChain to make this clear to the community and people watching this recording later, is that we at nChain Group do not intend and have no desire to be the be-all and end-all of Bitcoin Cash. We recognize that for it to be successful, we'll take the collaboration and efforts of groups, companies, and people all around the world. And what we're doing is using our resources and innovations to try and spur and help other people to create and develop the things that will be necessary. We'll be creating some of the things ourselves, but our mission really is to enable a spark that goes on across the world so there's a thriving community of groups that are contributing to Bitcoin Cash's success.
And exactly, think about when you're an employee, when you're just an employee, not when you're empowered in a company, not when you get to develop something, but you're just another cog, like many employees are, whether you work at Waitrose, just swiping something or whatever else. When you don't get to create, we want to see a world where people create, where people can go out there and create, whether they're working for someone else or they do it themselves, not because we grab everyone and say they're working for us. We're growing slowly. I mean, we've got 60-something people now, and we're
70-something, yeah.
70-something. Every time I get this wrong because it goes up. And over time, we'll grow. But I don't ever envision that we're going to be Facebook and 50,000 people or Google. But what it means is we get to see many different companies evolve. We get to see startups start, develop, grow. And you want to know the really cool thing? It's better than saying, I'm chief of Google or whatever else. I get to say that idea that these guys are running with and saying is their own, that's mine.
Or we helped something.
Right. Or I helped develop that. Or these guys were inspired. Or these guys, the best one is, I had an idea and it was shit, and these guys got it to work.
That's right. Because you do have a lot of shit ideas once in a while, Craig.
Do I?
Yeah, but that's why at nChain we have launched an investment vehicle called nChain Reaction, because we're trying to spark a chain reaction around the world with our resources. And so we're investing in ventures that have products and applications that make Bitcoin Cash more usable easily as electronic cash on a global basis. Our first two investments are with yours.org, with Ryan Charles and Clemens Lay in San Francisco, a social network using Bitcoin Cash for micropayments, and just announced this week CentBee, a South African company, go CentBee, bzzz, that has one of the best, social functioning wallets that we've seen, and is building a new and we think revolutionary merchant payment ecosystem for Bitcoin Cash. And we're happy to support them, not just with money, but some of the innovation ideas that we've been working on. It's part of what we are trying to contribute as our place in the Bitcoin Cash world. What are some other things that at least you can tell us about that nChain's doing to support Bitcoin Cash? Because we have our patent lawyer in the audience, and she will stand up if you say things you shouldn't be saying.
Luckily, I can't see her, so if she jumps up and down, I can see these lights at the front, and if she tries, she'll have to run up here and bitch slap me.
But what are some things that we can talk about?
The thresholding is actually a very good one. I mean, we've talked about that before, but that's going to change how keys are done.
Threshold signatures.
Threshold signatures, and beyond that, we actually take it where signatures don't exist. So we use a computational process where no one actually has a signature ever. You can actually, the private key doesn't really exist. It's a distributed process where you can actually sign a transaction without any party ever disclosing their part of a key or rebuilding a whole key. So no one can ever steal it. An example would be if Mt. Gox had a system like this, it would mean that you'd have to hack Mt. Gox and every single customer of Mt. Gox for it to be successful, which is probably unlikely. I mean, one thing to break into Mt. Gox, especially if it's internal, and it's another thing to do it
allegedly.
Never know. Well, it didn't say. It could have been. It may not have been. Anyway.
What else? We're collaborating with different groups. Right?
So we're collaborating with a lot of groups at the moment. We've just announced the Electrum Cash project, which is going to sort of increase private transactions, fungibility, and much more within Bitcoin. So what that will actually allow is people to start treating it as cash. I know a lot of people out there won't like this in certain areas, because when we're finished with it, with the addition of like blinded thresholds and a few other things, it will be truly fungible. There won't be any network chain analysis. There won't be linking things back to wallets. There won't be any of these services like our friends over in Russia are selling at the moment, where they get government who bought Bitcoin. I'm sorry, we're going to totally screw the pooch for you on that one, and basically ruin everything that you want to do to try and figure out the history of Bitcoin. You can basically go back individual by individual as a government, the way cash works, and we're going to make it back to fungible cash.
Yeah, give it up for fungible cash.
So those who are putting their money into chain analysis, I'm sorry, we're going to make your life a nightmare.
No, we're not.
No, I'm just going to let other people do it for you.
You've also been in communication with the key Bitcoin Cash developer groups, and they're very important, obviously, because they help and contribute their time to the software implementations that are so key to the success of Bitcoin Cash. And we have announced with them plans to have, every 6 months starting in May of this year, protocol upgrades, because we don't want to call them hard forks anymore. They are software protocol upgrades. What can you tell us that's at least not confidential yet about some plans that are coming for Bitcoin Cash software protocol upgrades?
So we're going to re-enable a whole lot of opcodes. We've got people in my team at the moment working on that. They've already started uploading onto GitHub and other such things.
And why is that important to re-enable opcodes in the scripting language?
Because we're going to re-enable all those things people used to get excited about Bitcoin for. Tokenization, the ability to make either divisible or non-divisible shares at your choice, bonds, futures, derivatives, things that actually make smart contracts that tie to vehicles, things that allow you to trade over time. The ability to have, for instance, if you are Amazon, being able to have a payment that only validates as the goods get delivered and they're signed and received, and everything is stored on the blockchain. Potentially even a hash of the photograph showing that you signed the thing and received it, so you can't ever say, no, I didn't get that.
So the opcodes are important to be restored because they empower more complicated functionality through the blockchain and transactions. So it's more than just a currency, but can power smart contracts and other functionality which will drive up the usage of Bitcoin
Which
Cash.
then becomes an entire ecosystem. And we will allow people to build that ecosystem. We've been in chats with a few, I won't say exactly what yet, but organizations that will roll out a digitized fiat that is pegged on Bitcoin Cash. And the idea there is then there's no arguments about atomic swaps. It just happens. And there's no arguments about volatility. It just happens. But at the same time, it increases adoption. If you don't want volatility, take Bitcoin Cash that's pegged. If you do want volatility and you want to have the upside, choose. If you want to pay your fees one way or the other, choose. And we give people back choice. And over time, others can start developing ways of limiting the volatility by making futures contracts that actually link in those wallets.
So the message we want to give the audience at that point is that we, along with a lot of the key developer groups and other important people working on Bitcoin Cash, are very mindful of laying a map and a path to increasing the functionality of Bitcoin Cash so that it's obviously a powerful electronic peer-to-peer cash system, but that it carries with it the potential for the functionality that you see claimed on other blockchains that we believe can be all done in what we think is the all-in-one coin, Bitcoin Cash. And so we're very mindful of that, and we're definitely working with a lot of people to plan that. So I'm going to spend our last few minutes talking about the future, right, of Bitcoin Cash. So let's talk about investing. Clearly, there's been a huge media frenzy over the last few months about the Bitcoin and the rise of its value. Not doing so well the last few days, but that's okay. We believe in it all long term. You probably get asked all the time by people, should I invest in Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin? You know, what's its potential for the future? What do you tell people about investing in Bitcoin Cash?
It's like any investment. Never invest more than you can afford to lose. If you can afford to lose and put something away, good. All I can say is my life is dedicated to Bitcoin. I've spent the last 10 years, and I could be retired now, and I'm not going to be. And I'm not going to be retired in 10 years' time, or probably 20, because we have a world not just to conquer, but to change. We have a world to grow. This is a garden, and gardens don't actually grow because you just throw a few seeds in there and walk away. You have to tend them, and you have to put a lot of effort in. And it's a long time sometimes before seeing the results. But if you do it well, and you allow people to help, and you get communities involved, you make something magnificent. And that's what we can do with Bitcoin.
You've clearly made it your life's work. Why are you so passionate about Bitcoin?
A world without borders. A world where anyone can engage with anyone globally. We're not going to have the world we recognize in 20 years' time, but we're going to have a world that, if we do right, will be open, where for the first time, and I'll emphasize this, the first time in human history, we no longer care about whether someone is German or French or African or Indian. We care about the quality of their work, about how they care about their customers, how they want to engage, how they interact in a social level. And I think that's amazing. And what better could anyone donate their life to dedicate their life to invest their life to, than that?
On that note, that is a powerful dream and a powerful vision for not just Bitcoin Cash, but for a world which I think will be not just be borderless, but better for people of all socioeconomic status and giving them sovereignty and control over their finance and their future. It's a world we dream of. It's a world we hope all of you dream of, and that anyone who you talk with or who sees this video dreams of along with us. We're dedicated at nChain Group to working towards that dream, and we ask all of you to join us. Thank you very much.